I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring Gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I have a really interesting story I am bringing you regarding an armored truck robbery that occurred in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, this robbery resulted in the murder of a Loomis armored truck security guard. His name was Hector Trochez. Now, before we get into the robbery, which took place on December 18th of 2013, I want to tell you a little bit about Hector Trochez. Hector was born in Honduras in 1968 and made his way all the way to Kenner, Louisiana. This is an outskirts, if you will, of New Orleans. Now, at the time of the incident I'm going to tell you about, he had been married for 13 years and he had been an armored truck guard for over 5 years. So he was very experienced. He was 45 years old at the time of his murder, and he was just loving life. He loved his job, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. Now, judging by the comments on his obituary, he was a very beloved human being, very respected. People called him Big Daddy. That was his nickname because he was a rather large man. He was 6'1", and he was probably close to 300 pounds, just a big man. So as I mentioned, Hector worked for Loomis Armored Car, and this company specializes in transporting large amounts of cash. They are a global company. They not only have services in the U.S., but various points around the globe. And not only do they transport cash, they transport jewels, and they transport other high-value sensitive material. Now, I am sure everyone listening has seen these trucks at your local Walmart, for example. But where they are most prevalent is banks, and they service a lot of ATMs as well. And that's exactly what Hector Trochez was doing this day in December of 2013. Now, Hector worked as part of a team, and they were tasked with safeguarding this cash during transport. And y'all stop and think about it for a second. How dangerous is this job? You're basically driving around, and at any given time, you have millions of dollars in some cases at your disposal. It's in your vehicle, and really everyone knows that. You spot these armored trucks pretty easily when they're driving around the road. I mean, they're like giant tanks, right? It takes a lot of bravery to be part of an armored truck personnel. Now, you also have to be a pretty stand-up citizen to work for Loomis. They conduct one of the most stringent background checks probably ever known to man. Think about it, without really digging into someone's background. How easy would it be for someone to be, let's say, nefarious or have nefarious intent and want to score a ton of cash and make it easy on themselves. So they get a job working for like Loomis, and that's their in. So they really spend a lot of money and a lot of time checking the backgrounds of the individuals they hire. And that speaks to me a lot about Hector's character. Now, these armored trucks, they're very secure as well. As I just mentioned, they're like tanks. Among the features they have, ballistic protection. These are heavy metal plates completely surrounding the vehicle. And that means that the truck is armored to withstand gunfire. And in addition, the glass is bullet resistant. And y'all, it's a misnomer when people tell you glass is bulletproof. Glass is not bulletproof. Eventually, if you shoot a piece of even heavy armored glass enough times, it's going to break. And bullets will make it through. But it is very bullet resistant, and it would take a lot of bullets to really get through there. These armored trucks also have onboard surveillance cameras in the vehicle, and those cameras, they focus on blind spots around the vehicle. And of course, they also have GPS, so these vehicles can be tracked at all times. And the staff that is hired by these armored truck companies, they're highly trained. They know how to deal with dangerous situations, as well as how to de-escalate situations if needed. And of course, all of these guards carry firearms. You'd be crazy not to. So on December 18th of 2023, Hector was performing his duties as a Loomis security guard in the New Orleans area. Now, in this case, rather than picking up cash from the bank, the truck was delivering cash to the bank. They were actually servicing the ATM, and they were going to refill it. And this was a New Orleans location of Chase Bank. And on board to be filled into that ATM machine was some $260,000 to $265,000. Now, for this cash delivery, there were two people in the armored truck. The driver, a female by the name of Hector Trochez, and Hector was the guard. That was the one who would actually leave the truck with the cash and fill the ATM. So on this day, Hector steps out of the truck. He starts to unload the cash. And as soon as he does that, a Chevy Tahoe pulls up. And three armed men step out. And they basically tell Hector to give them the money. He's like, fuck that. Pulls his gun, and a shootout ensues right away, and he, in short, is killed in broad daylight. And the robbers, they get away with $260,000 to $265,000. And the reason that I keep saying that is there are various reports of exactly how much cash it was, but 260 plus to be certain. And all this occurs in about a minute, y'all. From this guy pulling up to the ATM, probably thinking about what he's going to do over the weekend, to being dead. It happened that fast. Now, as I said, this was in broad daylight. There were a ton of eyewitnesses, but one brave eyewitness to this, he actually jumps in his truck and he follows these guys. He sees the men pull over at some point, and look, they knew this guy was following them because they took shots at him during this getaway. But at some point, they do exit that Tahoe, they get out, and they get into a gray vehicle, which this guy sees all that, and he reports this to the police, and he tells them, hey, the Tahoe, here's where they jumped out of that and jumped in another vehicle. Police then go to that scene and they pick up that vehicle, and the engine was still running when they picked it up. So they didn't even turn the car off. They basically jumped out of it. As you would think, this is a big deal. City of New Orleans lit up with the headlines of this happening, and family and friends of Hector would quickly come out in the media, and they would talk about how Hector just loved his job. And they made a big point of saying he was never fearful. He wasn't someone that was ever worried about getting shot or anything like that. He said, hey, if it happens, it happens. I love what I do. Just a very brave guy. Police, they quickly hold a news conference and they release descriptions of these suspects. And they described all three as being 5'7" to 5'9", all wearing dark jackets and hooded sweatshirts. And they said one of the suspects may have had dreadlocks. And the media then spoke to some people that were on that scene. There were witnesses to this. I mean, there were people everywhere. This was 11 o'clock in the morning during a weekday when all of this went down. And they got some reactions. A firearms instructor who they talked to that actually lived a few houses away from that Chase Bank said, hey, it's Christmas. People get desperate and they'll do anything. This is New Orleans after all. Anything can happen in broad daylight. He went on to say that the rapid succession of the gunfire, which he estimated as about a dozen shots, sounded like it came from a semi-automatic weapon with either a 9mm or 40 caliber bullets. That was his take. A technician with a Take 5 oil change that was across the street from the bank. He also said he heard about a dozen gunshots, and he said he saw cars stream out of the parking lot very quickly. And he said it wasn't the robbers that he saw running out of that parking lot. It was other customers. It freaked everybody out and they started clearing out of there for obvious reasons. And investigators, when they cordoned off this scene, they laid about 15 cones out to mark bullet casings. So that would lead you to believe there were at least 15 shots in that quick of an amount of time. And incidentally, later on, it would be discovered that Hector was never able to return fire on these guys.
Jim, did you see what happened in Texas today?
Wait, before you tell me that, let me tell you what happened in New York.
It cannot be as crazy as the case I told you about yesterday in Louisiana.
You know what? We should do a podcast about it.
And with that, we did. Crime Wire Weekly covers the crime news headlines that have dominated the week.
We cover trending crimes from all over the country and even sprinkle in a few globally.
Crime Wire Weekly is available now wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Simply by searching Crime Wire Weekly or clicking the link in the description of this podcast. Now, you may be wondering, what about the driver of the Loomis armored car? Well, she was unharmed. However, she was also pinned down as one of the three assailants that was shooting was firing in her direction the entire time, and that was intentional, that was planned, and that was to keep her from exiting that vehicle and being able to return fire herself. Now, this brave female's aunt came out later on and said her niece called her in tears, telling her, hey, my partner, Hector, was shot. And her aunt said she was crying. She was very overwhelmed and very much in grief. And it was almost leading me to believe that she kind of blamed herself for not being able to get out of that armored car and assist Hector. And obviously, there's no blame to be shouldered on her shoulders. I mean, if someone is pinning you down and you can't get out of the vehicle, it is what it is. Otherwise, you would both be dead. So just a few days after the incident took place, the New Orleans Police Department chief, he comes out and he vows to catch the three gunmen responsible. And he also announces a $50,000 combined reward for information leading to the arrest of anybody involved. And that's important because people love to rat people out when it comes to money, right? And if these guys have been running their mouth to anybody bragging about getting away with this, seemingly, $50,000 is a lot of money and a lot of enticement to possibly get somebody to tell on your ass. And that was what the police were hoping for. However, time passes, several weeks, and there's no suspects, at least that the police are telling people. Then 3 weeks after the robbery, on January 2nd of 2014, police were, boom. Then just a few weeks after the robbery, on January 2nd of 2014, police release a composite sketch of a person of interest. And they also released the fact that the witness who saw the robbers get out of the original car and into that gray car, he did manage to get a partial plate number that included the numbers 141654. And it was a temporary tag. So police at this point, they weren't sure if this was a good lead or not. I mean, how hard is it to get a temporary tag? It was probably stolen is what they were thinking, but hey, it's better than nothing. And then at least in front of the public, the trail seemed to run kind of cold. And that is until police provided another update. And this was in April of 2014, 4 months after the robbery. And they announced that a screwdriver found inside the Tahoe, which incidentally was stolen. As a matter of fact, that screwdriver was used to break the steering column and enable that Tahoe to be hot wired. Well, they took that screwdriver and they tested it for DNA. And they managed to pull DNA off of that screwdriver and link it to a man by the name of Lil Bear George. That's right, Lilbear, Lil Bear George. And they did their homework on this before they tied Lil Bear to it outside of the DNA. And they talked to the owner and they said, hey, do you know Little Bear? Did he work on your vehicle? And maybe that's why his DNA is on that screwdriver. And the owner's like, no, I have no idea who this guy is. So police start retracing Lil Bear's movements after the robbery. And they discover that shortly thereafter, he made kind of a big purchase. Well, I would say a lot of a big purchase. He paid $50,000 cash for a vehicle. And this wasn't a man that just walked around with $50,000 cash. So that told you a lot. Also, at this time, it came out Hector was killed with a .223 caliber rifle, and that one of the bullets had shot him in the head. And police said that that particular shot was fired from the vehicle. So police have what appears to be a suspect, a solid suspect at this time. And this is great because when you have a crime involving multiple people and you make that first arrest, what typically happens is that first guy almost always is going to rat out the other guys, most times to get some sort of deal. But there's one problem in the case of Lil Bear, and that is that he fled the state. And police, they had no idea where Lil Bear George was. And by December 18th of 2014, exactly 1 year since the shootout that killed Hector Trochez, not a single arrest had been made in this case. Not saying they didn't work it. They just couldn't find anybody. And they didn't have a whole lot of leads outside of Lil Bear. So time passes and people forget. And one of the things that's very important to do when you have these unsolved cases is to continue to do everything you can to keep them in the public forefront, the public frame of mind. And so anniversaries of these crimes are very important because they kind of reintroduce the case to people that may not have caught it the first time around. And it keeps a lot of these cases from going completely cold. And so police did that. They came out on the anniversary. As a matter of fact, Hector Trochez, family and friends came out and they held kind of a visual and all these things trying to keep this case in the forefront of the public mind. But still, no real leads to speak of. Then, a little over 2 years after the robbery, on February 11th of 2016, police pull over a car in the New Orleans area, and they pull 4 people out of this car. And what had happened was this was state police, and they have watched essentially this car conduct a drug deal with another vehicle, and they pull it over and they search it, and they find, of course, drugs. They find $14,000 in cash, some stolen guns, and heroin. Now, one of the men inside that car, guess who it was? Little Bear George. So police are ecstatic. They just caught this guy that's DNA is on a screwdriver that was in this crime from 2013. They bring him back, and they're thinking, okay, this guy's going to sing like a fucking canary, and we're going to find out everything about this case that we don't know. But the problem is, apparently, at this point, Lil Bear, he ain't cooperating. He's not saying much. At least that's what you would gather. Until nearly 4 years after the robbery, when the following article was released via the Baton Rouge Advocate. This was on November 6th of 2017, and I'm going to read it for you quickly. Headline says, Feds charge 6 in 2013 slaying of an armored truck driver, Hector Trochez, capping 4-year probe. And it goes on to read, nearly 4 years after Loomis armored truck driver Hector Trochez was fatally shot during an elaborately planned holdup outside a Carrollton area bank, prosecutors have secured an indictment charging 5 men and 1 woman in the case. A federal grand jury in New Orleans returned a 4-count indictment accusing Chuck Woody, who goes by Chuck Ofamata, Lil Bear George, Jeremy, quote, Pipe Estevez, Curtis, quote, Blow Johnson Jr., Robert, quote, Lil Rob Brumfield III, and Jasmine Theophil of various roles in that robbery that left Trochez dead in late 2013. Ofamata, who was 30, George, who was 28, Estevez, who was 31, Johnson, who is 25, and Brumfield, who is 24, were all charged with plotting to obstruct interstate commerce by robbing Trochez's truck and with the deadly stick-up itself, as well as using guns to commit the crime. The indictment also accuses George and Theophil, his 24-year-old girlfriend, of obstructing a grand jury proceeding by destroying a cell phone. All of the defendants except Brumfield, who may be in the Houston area, have been arrested. Theophil was released on a $10,000 bail. The 11-page indictment capped a 4-year investigation into one of the most publicized unsolved killings in recent New Orleans history. And it came just a week after acting U.S. Attorney Dwayne Evans' office unfurled a separate indictment charging 3 other men in a similar deadly caper this year. The May 31st robbery attempt that left Loomis truck driver James McBride fatally wounded outside a Mid-City bank. And I may cover that one as well, because I came across that when researching this episode. It goes on to read, last week's indictment also linked those 3 suspects, Armistead Kiefer, his son Jerome Kiefer, and Deltoni Scott, to a 2015 holdup of a Brinks armored truck outside a bank near Bayou St. John. So unrelated case, but very similar. Goes on to say, taken together, these indictments mean all of the major armored truck heists reported in New Orleans since 2013 have resulted in criminal charges. All of the defendants charged with having a hand in the deaths of Trochez and McBride face the possibility of the death penalty, though prosecutors can decline pursuing that option, and we'll get into that. The slaying of Kenner resident Trochez shocked the New Orleans area, occurring 1 week before Christmas in broad daylight outside of a Chase Bank on South Carrollton and South Claiborne Avenue. The 45-year-old native of Honduras was gunned down after 3 masked riflemen approached him while he was delivering money to the bank's drive-through automated teller machine. The indictment did not say who the government believes those riflemen were. It was several months after the Trochez slayings before the names of 2 suspects, George and Theophil, became public. An April 2014 federal court filing reported George's DNA was detected on a screwdriver found in a stolen SUV used to carry out the attack on Trochez. It also accused George of fleeing Louisiana with a group of men driving another car belonging to his girlfriend. George later allegedly bought his girlfriend a new car after the robbery, and that was that $50,000 car purchase. George has been in federal custody for more than a year, awaiting trial alongside several other defendants on gun and drug charges in connection with the alleged drug deal in the French Quarter in February of 2016. Meanwhile, the indictment in the Trochez case marks only the latest of several legal battles for Ofamata. At some point, two informants told the FBI Ofamata had fatally shot a woman and a man who owed money to a friend of Ofamata's named Timothy Webb. The shootings took place at Webb's 7th Ward chop shop in April of 2008, and the victims' badly burned bodies turned up later in the back of a car that had been torched. According to multiple sources, these informants were speaking with federal investigators who apparently were probing the Trochez killing. The feds forwarded the allegations about the chop shop killings to the New Orleans police. Ofamata and Webb were arrested in May, and they are awaiting trial on state charges of second-degree murder in the chop shop killings. Both have pleaded not guilty to the slayings of Jarnell Sanders and Candace Gillard. Earlier in 2016, a grand jury charged Ofamata and yet another man, Lydell Hinton, with being involved in sex trafficking of a minor. Hinton pleaded guilty in late September to a reduced charge of transporting an individual across state lines to engage in prostitution and is awaiting sentencing. Ofamata, meanwhile, awaits trial in that case as well. Obviously, this guy's a total jerk-off, right? It's not clear to what extent Hinton is cooperating in the trafficking case or if he will factor into Trochez's prosecution. Trochez's loved ones couldn't be reached for comment Monday. However, on a Facebook page set up in his memory, they described their hope that investigators would eventually charge someone in that case. Hector has never forgotten, the post said, wishing authorities would find the heartless bastards that did this. And it looks like they did. Finally, 4 years after the robbery. And there's movement on this case. Everyone is arrested that was not already in jail, with the exception of one guy, Lil Rob Brumfield. Police just simply could not locate this guy. But that is not and does not slow the prosecutions of the other individuals that were involved. They're not going to wait till they find Brumfield, right? And on August 31st of 2018, the feds announced they would be seeking the death penalty for 3 of the assailants, Lil Bear George, Chuck Ofamata, and Curtis Blow Johnson. The feds singled out Ofamata as the trigger man during this time, and they said he was the one who actually killed Trochez. And in addition to that, they announced he was charged in those 2 additional murders that I just told you about that occurred in 2008. Now, there's more movement in the case when in March of 2019, authorities in Texas finally tracked down and they arrest Robert Lil Rob Brumfield, and that was after 16 months on the lam. And he was actually caught via a tip to the hotline in Texas. Guess what? Somebody wanted to collect a reward, and he was caught. Somebody tipped off police. He was actually hiding out in a Spring, Texas home when police showed up. He took off running, but he was quickly captured. Then, on October 2nd of 2019, feds come out and they said, hey, we're close to securing our first conviction in this robbery and murder. And they referenced Jasmine Theophile, the girlfriend. Now, it was alleged she provided a vehicle to Lil Bear and a group of other men that they used to get the hell out of Dodge after the robbery. And there was also some other allegations involved with her. So the feds come out and they say, hey, we're about to get her convicted. But just a week later, feds announced they were postponing her trial indefinitely, which led me to believe, wait a minute, she's got to be cooperating, and that's why they're postponing this trial. And that hunch I had seemed to be correct, because just 2 weeks later, on October 23rd of 2019, she pleads guilty to obstruction of justice, and she gets probation. And there's only one way she would have ended up with probation, and that's if she was cooperating. Then, in early November of 2019, a shocker came out when feds allege that someone by the name of Theory King, who was a bank employee at the Chase Bank, was in communication with one of the assailants before and after the robbery. And that was Jeremy Estevez, who was communicating with this Chase Bank employee. It was discovered later the banker actually told the robbers when this ATM was going to be serviced, and she was promised $15,000 for helping to plan that robbery. Just disgusting. Led to someone's murder over $15,000. Crazy. So here's how everything shook out in this case. Jasmine Theophil, the girlfriend of Lil Bear, she ended up pleading guilty to obstruction. She received probation. Robert Lil Rob Brumfield, he was the guy who drove the second getaway vehicle, that gray car. He was convicted of conspiracy, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And they actually tried to get him on murder as well, but he was acquitted of the murder charge. Jeremy Estevez, who drove the initial getaway vehicle, the Tahoe, he was convicted of robbery and murder charges, and he received the heaviest sentence, 50 years. Now, Chuck Ofamata was one of the three gunmen to fire shots at Trochez. He copped a plea of guilty to using and discharging a firearm in furtherance of a violent crime, and he ended up taking a 40-year sentence, which made me say WTF, because this is the guy that was also identified as the murderer, the guy that actually fired the shot that shot and killed Trochez, but they never charged him with murder. Now, I don't know exactly why that is. I can only assume that because he was up for murder for 2 murders, actually, in 2008, remember? They linked him to those crimes as well. I think maybe they were going for life in prison or the death penalty on those cases. And so they figured he's already going to be in prison for the rest of his life anyway, at a minimum. And so they only sentenced him to the 40 years. I have no clue, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but that's what he got. 40 years less than Jeremy Estevez. How about Little Bear George? He also copped a plea to the same charges as Ofamata, and he received an identical 40-year sentence. And finally, Curtis Blow Johnson, who fired shots at the driver of that Loomis truck to keep her inside the vehicle, he got the worst of it as well, with a 50-year sentence, both him and Estevez. And for the record, he was the last conviction of this case, Curtis Blow Johnson, and that was in March of 2022, meaning it took 9 years to get all these guys convicted and sent to prison. But not where you would think. They didn't go to bloody Angola. Actually, these guys escaped bloody Angola because the federal government took over this case many years prior. I think they just thought it wasn't getting solved quick enough. They took it over and they did get these convictions, so shout out to them. But because of that, these guys were sent to federal prisons, and Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola is a state prison. So they managed to escape it. And there you have it. That is the story of that Loomis armored truck robbery. And I may cover that other one as well. You'd be surprised, y'all. I looked up the FBI stats. I can't recall them off the top of my head, but you'd be surprised how many armored trucks are actually robbed. I'm sure people drive around that have nefarious intent and they're like, oh, I'd love to rob that armored truck. But it actually happens pretty frequently. As a matter of fact, right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, yesterday, an armored truck got robbed at an ATM. Thankfully, nobody was killed or shot, but it happens more often than you would think, at least more often than I thought anyway. Check out the Patreon, commercial-free early releases and more. Patreon.com/Bloody Angola Podcast. Could not do this podcast without the support of those Patreon members. Check out Crime Wire Weekly. This is a weekly podcast put out every Friday by myself and true crime podcaster Kelly Jennings. We cover full week's crime headlines that are trending all over the internet, and we do it in a unique way. You can find us just by searching Crime Wire Weekly wherever you listen to this podcast, or I'll link it in the description of this podcast as well, so you can find it. Also, I'm recording this on October 1st. This is the kickoff, if you will, of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Breast Cancer Awareness Month is very close to my heart. And so, ladies out there, get your mammograms scheduled if you have not done so. I have my pink on today because real men will wear pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'd just like to say that. And until next time, for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wild.